Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmage, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week we find ourselves in the 7th week of Pentecost, and our Old Testament reading comes from the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Let's look at a little bit of background as we get started on this. Ezekiel is the third book of the prophets attributed to the priest Ezekiel, son of Bezalel. He was one of the Judeans deported to Babylonia in 597 BCE. Most of this book is believed to have been written by Ezekiel himself. This book illustrates elaborate visions of the glory of God. There's 3 great visions. We see one in chapter 1, 8 through 11, and 40 to 48. It also seems to have a preoccupation with the fate of Jerusalem, and well, it seems that there is also a repetition of key themes as well. The book argues that the rebellious and now defeated house of Israel would come to recognize the power, sovereignty, and covenantal loyalty of their God, Yahweh, in the events that had so devastatingly overturned their assumptions about national security and privilege. We read now from Ezekiel chapter 2, verses 1 through, I know our lectionary says 5, but I added on a couple to help with context, so 1 through 7. He said to me, "O mortal, stand up on your feet, and I will speak with you." And when he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. He said to me, "Mortal, I am sending you to the people of Israel, to a nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have transgressed against me to this very day. The descendants are impudent and stubborn. I am sending you to them, and you shall say to them, 'Thus says the Lord God.' Whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they shall know that there has been a prophet among them. And you, O mortal, do not be afraid of them, and do not be afraid of their words. Though briars and thorns surround you, and you live among scorpions, do not be afraid of their words, and do not be dismayed at their looks, for they are a rebellious house. You shall speak my words to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house." Stubborn, impudent, rebellious. These are the adjectives God uses to address to the prophet to describe the people of ancient Israel. Their descriptors certainly do not cast Ezekiel's audience in the best light. The labels neither tell the whole story of Israel's behavior nor provide the ethical scope for a proper theological anthropology. It's a one-sided characterization. So these are 3 points to think about from the commentator Tyler Mayfield. First, the adjectives remind us that side of humanity that finds it difficult to respond obediently to God's call. We are capable of stubbornness. For Ezekiel's context, words such as stubborn are particularly poignant given their occurrence within his call or commissioning near the beginning of this biblical book. Ezekiel has experienced an overwhelming divine vision and now hears a divine voice. If he is not already engulfed in the immensity of this prophetic call, our passage promises to create such a feeling. His call shall not involve preaching to a receptive audience ready for introspection and change. The prophet is called instead to a house of rebellion, a phrase unique to this biblical book. So as we continue with point 1, God's call to Ezekiel, while including fantastic visions of the divine, also includes a realistic element. People may refuse to hear. People choose their response, and sometimes they choose not to heed the words of the prophet. This rather pessimistic attitude toward ancient Israel is also a result of the exilic context of the book of Ezekiel. If God is not to blame for the exile, and Ezekiel surely affirms that theological notion, then the people must be to blame. This point, of course, highlights the danger of such name-calling. While it is true that we, like ancient Israel, can be a stubborn people at times, it is simply not true that many events, especially international events like the fall of the nation-states, are the result of our rebellion. When attempting to make sense of their exilic situation, some prophets tended to emphasize Israel's direct role in their demise, while ignoring the more likely political factors at play. We must be careful when speaking of rebellious houses to not misplace blame and shame. When bad things happen, it can be tempting to resort to blaming the victim. God holds out hope that the people will respond. Second, the call of God through the prophet implies that the people can respond. Although they are rebellious, they are not without hope. God holds out hope that the people will hear and respond. This implication is actually not emphasized much in the small passage from Ezekiel. Additionally, if you continue reading into Ezekiel 3, you will find more name calling. The house of Israel have a hard forehead and a stubborn heart. Yet the prophetic call for change still goes forth, and this prophetic message is written down and preserved. It is read and reread through the years and centuries until this very Sunday in Pentecost. The prophetic call goes forth not because there is no chance of a response. The call comes to us because we can and do respond. Third, this passage from Ezekiel 2 connects to the gospel reading for today, Mark 6, 1 through 13. In the lesson from Mark, Jesus teaches in his hometown synagogue and receives a less than positive reception. In response to this rejection, he quotes a proverb, "Prophets are not without honor in their hometown." The two readings share the idea that a prophetic voice is not always heard. Jesus identifies himself as a prophet, standing in continuity with ancient Israel's prophetic tradition, who, like those earlier prophets, does not find everywhere a receptive audience. There is risk inherent in speaking for and about God. Prophets take this risk. Some will hear and respond to the call. Others will be more stubborn. In our reading today, we hear that Israelites are impudent and stubborn and rebellious. How are we in the 21st century world impudent, stubborn, and rebellious? Well, we see this all the time, don't we? And it's not just against God, it's against governments, it's against all kinds of things where we are stubborn and rebellious. We see this in politics where one side is more stubborn than the other and won't move, even though it might be something that might help all people. It's really fascinating how that works, isn't it? And our stubbornness and rebelliousness can get in the way of things. Do you think we are more stubborn than the listeners who heard from this prophetic directly? Or are we more passive in our stubbornness? I think it's yes to both. I don't know if we're more stubborn than our ancestors of 3,000 years ago, maybe not. But are we maybe more passive? Perhaps. We might be more passive in our stubbornness. So just some things for you to think about this week as you read this reading from Ezekiel. And I think it's always important to remember the context of they are in the midst and throes of a devastating time in their life. And Ezekiel's bringing them a word of hope. And also Ezekiel's theology is different than some of the other theologies that we hear in the Old Testament of a God of retaliation. We hear of a God who is with God's people in the midst of all of the things that are going on in their world. So keeping those things in mind as well. Well, I pray that you stay cool. I hope that you have a happy 4th and that you can spend some time thinking about how we are stubborn and how oftentimes we aren't willing to listen to the prophet Ezekiel, but also the other things of our faith that we can be stubborn on and think we know better than God. Have a blessed week and take care and stay cool.